May 26, 1941. Lake Pontchartrain, New Orleans. Commander Ross Daggett of the U.S. Navy stood on the shore with arms crossed, watching a strange plywood boat slam again and again into the sea wall. Each time, it shuddered, reversed, spun almost within its own length, and charged forward again. Behind him, Major Ernest Linsert of the Marine Corps scribbled notes as fast as he could. The men were there to witness what many in Washington had dismissed as the delusion of a loud-mouthed Irishman. But what they were about to see would change the entire course of World War II. The man behind the demonstration was Andrew Jackson Higgins, a shipbuilder from Nebraska, whose plywood boat would soon become one of the most important weapons of the war. It carried a single revolutionary feature: a steel ramp at the bow that dropped down, allowing soldiers and vehicles to charge directly onto a beach. That simple idea would make every major Allied amphibious invasion possible, from Guadalcanal to Normandy. Years later, Dwight D. Eisenhower would say, "If Andy Higgins hadn't designed and built those landing craft, we never could have gone in over an open beach. He's the man who won the war for us." But Higgins's story didn't begin in triumph. It began in bankruptcy. During the Great Depression, his lumber export business collapsed, leaving him with a boatyard, mounting debts, and a stubborn refusal to quit. In the Louisiana bayous, where he tested his early boats, Higgins learned that the marshes demanded vessels unlike any other. Boats that could glide through just 18 inches of water, run over logs, and beach themselves without wrecking their propellers. Out of trial and necessity, he created the Eureka boat, a vessel with a spoon-shaped bow, a deep V-hull that flattened toward the rear, and a tunnel protecting the propeller so it could crash ashore and reverse back safely. These innovations were practical, rugged, and unlike anything designed in Navy labs. Bootleggers, trappers, and oil drillers all bought them, keeping Higgins's small company alive through the lean years. By 1937, his debts were paid off, but far away in China, a new war was brewing that would soon make his invention world famous. In the summer of 1937, U.S. Marine Lieutenant Victor Krulak watched Japanese forces conduct amphibious landings at Shanghai. Through his telephoto lens, he noticed something remarkable. Japanese landing boats had a simple ramp that dropped down to let troops run directly onto the beach. He photographed them and sent the report back to Washington, where it was promptly ignored. By the late 1930s, the U.S. Navy still had no workable landing craft. The Marine Corps, convinced that amphibious warfare would be essential in any coming conflict, was desperate. When Navy-designed boats failed in test after test, the Marines heard rumors of a small Louisiana boatmaker whose shallow draft workboats could do what the Navy's couldn't. In 1938, they invited Higgins to demonstrate his Eureka boat at Norfolk, Virginia. The result stunned everyone. His boat skimmed across shallow water, ran onto the beach, reversed off without damage, and turned in its own length. For the first time, the Marines saw a craft that could deliver troops from ship to shore effectively. But there was one fatal flaw. Soldiers still had to climb over the sides to disembark. A deadly delay under fire. Then came Krulak's breakthrough. In early 1941, he showed Higgins a small model of the Japanese landing craft with a front ramp. Higgins studied it for half a minute, then called his chief engineer. Within hours, design work began. Without waiting for Navy approval, Higgins built 3 prototypes, his Eureka boat redesigned with a steel bow ramp. On May 26, 1941, at Lake Pontchartrain, Higgins demonstrated his new boat to stunned Navy observers. He loaded 36 men on board, beached the craft at full speed, dropped the ramp with a clang, and the men stormed ashore within seconds. He repeated the test with a jeep, driving it straight off the ramp and onto the beach. The Marines were ecstatic. The Navy brass, however, were furious that an outsider had succeeded where they'd failed for 2 decades. But by late 1941, with war looming, Washington could no longer ignore Higgins. The Navy finally placed large orders for what would become the LCVP, or Landing Craft Vehicle Personnel. The troops would simply call it the Higgins Boat. When Pearl Harbor was attacked in December 1941, Higgins employed just 75 people. Within 4 years, he would employ over 20,000. His company, Higgins Industries, exploded into one of the most extraordinary industrial success stories in American history. He built 7 plants across New Orleans, introduced assembly line production for boats, and did something unheard of in the segregated South. He hired black and white men, women, and even disabled workers to work side by side for equal pay. "I don't care what color you are," he said. "Can you build a boat?" Higgins became the first major employer in New Orleans with a fully integrated workforce. He paid fairly, demanded excellence, and inspired fierce loyalty. His workers called him Andy. Loudspeakers in the factories carried his booming voice, urging workers to remember that the guy who relaxes is helping the Axis. By 1943, Higgins Industries was producing 700 boats a month, a staggering figure that turned New Orleans into the world's boat-building capital. The Higgins boat made its combat debut in August 1942 at Guadalcanal. The first wave of U.S. Marines roared toward the beaches in these plywood craft. They slammed ashore, dropped their ramps, and Marines stormed forward. The boats performed flawlessly, beaching, unloading, and backing out under fire. They were fast, maneuverable, and incredibly tough. A few months later, during Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa, the Higgins boat proved itself again. General Eisenhower sent Higgins a telegram of thanks. "Let us thank God for Higgins Industries, labor and management, which has given us the boats with which to conduct our campaign. More power to you." Higgins framed it and hung it in his office for the rest of his life. By 1944, tens of thousands of Higgins boats were scattered across the world. But the true test would come on June 6, 1944. D-Day. Off the coast of Normandy, over 5,000 ships waited in the gray dawn. Hundreds of Higgins boats circled the transports, loaded with American soldiers. The men climbed down cargo nets into the rocking boats, seasick and terrified, waiting for the order to go in. At Utah Beach, the landings went almost smoothly. At Omaha, it was hell. German guns tore into the plywood hulls as the ramps dropped, and men charged into sheets of fire. Some Higgins boats were shredded before they even touched sand. Others landed in the killing zones and were destroyed within minutes. But wave after wave kept coming. By the end of that day, 156,000 Allied troops had landed in France, most of them in Higgins boats. Over the following weeks, those same craft ferried supplies, ammunition, and reinforcements until over 850,000 troops and 500,000 tons of supplies had crossed the beaches, without a single captured port. Eisenhower's later reflection wasn't exaggeration. Without Higgins's boats, the Allied invasion of Europe would have been impossible. In the Pacific, the story was the same. From Tarawa to Iwo Jima to Okinawa, Higgins boats carried Marines directly into fire. They beached on coral reefs, absorbed bullets, and went back for more. Over 23,000 LCVPs were built by war's end, landing more Allied troops on hostile shores than all other craft combined. When peace came in 1945, the miracle ended almost overnight. The Navy canceled all contracts. Within months, Higgins Industries, built entirely for war, collapsed. Higgins tried to pivot to civilian markets, pleasure boats, aircraft, even prefabricated houses, but none succeeded. He battled unions, lost contracts, and watched his empire fade. But his legacy endured. Andrew Higgins held over 30 patents in naval design. His bow ramp, spoon-shaped hull, and propeller tunnel became the foundation of all modern landing craft. His integrated factories broke racial barriers decades before the civil rights movement, and his boats gave the Allies the mobility that made victory possible. When asked about him years later, General Eisenhower didn't hesitate. "He's the man who won the war for us." From the swamps of Louisiana to the beaches of Normandy, Andrew Jackson Higgins turned plywood, steel, and sheer stubbornness into one of history's most important inventions. His boats carried the free world ashore and changed the tide of history forever.